Some presents are not designed to be unwrapped, some mysteries are not designed to be preserved, and some realities, once hidden, refuse to remain quiet, scraping their way back to the top with a soft, constant power that changes history itself. December 1873. The atmosphere hung thick and wet over the Mississippi River Delta, a covering of fog sticking to the old cypress trees and twisting waterways. In the rich plantation areas, where the marks of battle were still new, but the fantasy of greatness continued, a deal took place. It was a deal talked about in quiet voices, a dark reminder of a history that many said was gone, yet still held onto the ground like hanging moss. Two girls, twins barely 14 years old, their identities and backgrounds carefully wiped away, were bought at a secret sale. They were not headed for work in the fields, nor for household duty in the large house. No, their destiny was far more evil, covered in red cloth and given as Christmas morning presents for the wealthy man's two corrupt sons. What came after was not a story of magical help, nor a big uprising. It was a tale woven from quiet watching, frantic bravery, and an almost impossible act of resistance. What these two girls did in the springtime of 1874 would not only destroy 3 families, but it would also reveal a plot of quietness so strongly established that it had become the very foundation of the area. It would make an entire region burn its papers, move its courthouse, and together pretend a whole winter never existed. The wealthy man who purchased them was never spotted again, his memory dissolving into gossip and guessing. His sons were located, yes, but what had been done to them, not in body, but to their very core, was something no one could understand, something that went against the rough fairness of the time. And the twins, they disappeared not into empty space, but into a system so large, so carefully concealed that even now, scholars refuse to talk about it officially, worrying about the meanings of its true size. Before we go deeper into the frightening story of the wealthy man and the twin girls who permanently changed the path of St. Helena Parish, I ask you to think about the importance of forgotten histories. If you are pulled to the deepest parts of American history, the tales they purposely leave out from textbooks, the happenings they urgently tried to remove, then I ask you to follow this channel and hit that alert bell, and tell me in the notes below what state are you watching from. Because this tale, though based in the Louisiana Delta, reaches more locations, more existences than you might ever think. Now let us travel back to a period when the rules were a flexible idea, when strength was counted not just in areas of ground, but in the existences that worked upon it. And when 2 children, pure and unaware, were gift-covered like dolls, headed for a destiny that would either destroy them or shape them into something unbreakable. The area of St. Helena, Louisiana, in the winter months of 1873, was a location hanging in a constant dusk, caught dangerously between the harsh facts of a battle recently finished and the unclear morning of a new reluctantly accepted liberty. 8 years had gone by since the guns fell quiet, since the Freedom Declaration had theoretically broken the bonds of slavery. Yet rebuilding rather than mending had only made deeper the rotting injuries of the South, bending old wrongs into new sneaky shapes. The large plantations, structures to a past time of cotton rulers and human property, still remained. Their white pillars, often broken and cracking, shined stubbornly in the weak winter sunlight, throwing long thin shadows across land that reached to the edge. But the work that kept them had shifted, at least in writing. The land was now worked by men and women who were officially free, yes, but actually trapped by a pattern of owing and worry. Tenant farming had replaced the selling platform, but the bonds were simply made of hidden agreements, huge interest charges, and the regular danger of removal rather than cold, hard metal. The fantasy of liberty was a mean illusion shining just beyond grasp. Greensburg, the area center, was a small, dusty settlement. Its people barely 800 individuals, yet it was the center point of St. Helena. It contained the courthouse, a low brick structure with a constantly dripping top, the property office, where every paper and loan was carefully noted, and the only financial place for 30 miles. Its safe, a quiet proof of the riches gathered in a few strong hands. Greensburg was a settlement built on documents, on papers, deeds, agreements, loans, ownership papers, and the occasional selling document for animals or tools. Everything was written down, everything was stored. And in 1873, those papers were more precious than riches, for they decided who controlled what, and more importantly, who controlled whom, even if the words had moved from slave to person, who owes or renter. The strength of the written language, even when twisted, was complete. At the very top of this delicate, boiling society sat a man, the people, with a blend of respect and hate, simply called the Baron. His actual identity was Lucien Dio, though no one dared speak it in his company without the title. He was not royalty by birth, not by any European measure, but he held himself with an atmosphere of passed-down excellence, as if the very ground bowed to his desire, tall with a shock of gray hair that seemed to grab the brightness even in dark spaces, and a voice like far thunder rolling across the delta. Dio was a power of nature. He controlled 4,000 acres of best delta ground, rich and productive, and managed the work of over 200 individuals. Officially, they were tenant farmers. Officially, they were free. But Dio controlled their owing, their agreements, their very ways of living, and the futures of their young ones in a thick leather-covered record book he kept secured in his office, a record book more strong than any rules. His statement was rules, his record book, holy writing. He had 2 sons, receivers to his identity and his control, but not to his cleverness or his strong desire. The older Henry was 22, a man already emptied out by laziness and in passed-down meanness. He had his father's tall height, but none of his planned presence. Henry used his days riding the land edge on a beautiful black horse, a gun hung across his back, making boundaries no one dared step over. He had grown a name for nastiness, a scary, quiet evil that didn't need to lift its sound to create terror. Workers who upset him discovered their food strangely reduced, their homes searched without notice, their young ones suddenly moved to the farthest, most body-breaking land. His meanness was a slow, planned burn, created to break minds rather than bodies. The younger son, Julian, was 19, and if anything, even more terrible. Where Henry was cold and planning, Julien was explosive, a live wire of random anger and self-pleasing. He drank too much cheap alcohol, gambled away amounts his father quietly paid, and took far too much joy in watching things shatter, be it a cup, a mind, or a bone. He had been kicked out from 2 separate schools in New Orleans, coming home each time with growing owing his father unwillingly paid, and a mood his father, for reasons no one grasped, quietly overlooked. Julian gathered things, a collection of shining guns, sharply pointed knives, and rare birds he kept in fancy boxes until, ignored and hungry, they passed away. He was constantly uninterested, and being uninterested in a young man with unlimited strength and a mean side was a truly risky thing. A flame waiting for fuel. Lucian Dio cared for his sons not for who they were but for what they stood for, the continuation of his identity, the keeping going of his kingdom. He cared for them as a ruler cares for his receivers, as parts of his own strength. And in December of 1873, as the holiday time came near, he chose to give them a present that would tie them to him always, a present that would teach them the final harsh lesson of strength, that some individuals are not individuals at all, but objects, and objects, no matter their shape, can be controlled, managed, and thrown away at desire. The DeVoe property, known simply as the Baron's location by the people, sat at the finish of a long, curving oak-covered path that seemed to reach on forever, a tree tunnel bringing to a forgotten history. The house itself was a spreading three-level structure to a society that, despite all proof, Lucian refused to accept no longer remained. White-colored brick, its front tall and severe, with high, thin windows that seemed to look out empty, and wide covered areas that covered around the whole building, giving coolness in hot months and a scary exposure in cold months. Inside the spaces were huge and hollow, filled with thick dark furniture brought from France, pictures of relatives who were not truly relatives, but rather carefully picked figures from European royalty, and a quietness so deep, so heavy it felt like a kept breath, waiting for something to break it. In the living areas behind the main house, a group of 200 individuals existed in homes that had not received fixes since before the battle. These were not the pretty whitewashed cottages of romantic memory, but rough cut-down shacks, their tops fixed with metal, their walls filled with mud, their grounds bare dirt. They worked the land from the first light of morning until the last bit of brightness disappeared from the sky. Their bodies hurting, their minds tired. At dark they collected in low sounds, sharing what small they had, tiny portions of food, talked stories of strength, and urgent cautions passed from one time to the next. They understood the DeVoe family. They understood the casual meanness of Henry, the explosive mood of Julian, and they understood what came to those who upset them. In December of 1873, a new kind of worry settled over the living areas, a feeling that something was arriving because the wealthy man had been making journeys. 3 times in November, Lucian Dio had taken the riverboat downriver to New Orleans, remaining 2 or 3 days each time. He told no one where he traveled or what he did, his actions covered in his usual solid mystery. But when he came back, he held himself in a different way, not with tiredness, but with a small change in his manner, like a man who had made a huge choice, and was strongly satisfied with its meanings. His sons saw trading worried looks. The workers saw their eyes following his actions with a quiet group worry, and in a location like St. Helena Parish, where every action, every detail, every mystery journey held deep meaning. That kind of mystery meant something bad was coming. On December 18, 1873, Lucian Dio made his final strong journey to New Orleans. He came back on December 23, 2 days before Christmas, the atmosphere thick with waiting and a sharp chill. And he was not by himself. The river boat Crescent Belle, a paddle-wheeler whose fancy decoration hid its load of human and material items, stopped at the Greensburg landing just after dark on December 23rd. The atmosphere was cold and wet, the kind of spreading chill that went into one's bones and stayed there, refusing to be removed. A thin, ghostly fog rose from the dark spinning waters of the river, curling around the moss-filled supports and floating like a spirit across the rough, cut-down wooden boards of the landing. The few men removing load, their breath clouding in the cold atmosphere, worked with a frantic speed, eager to complete their hard jobs and pull back to the tiny warmth of their houses and fires. Lucien Deveau came down the boarding ramp alone, a single tall figure. He held a worn leather bag grabbed in one hand, and his long black wool jacket, made to excellence, seemed to take in the disappearing brightness, making him look less a man and more a moving darkness against the evening. He gave a short agreement to the landing workers, his look sweeping over them with an almost invisible hate, but he did not talk. His quietness was a command, a wall. Behind him, coming out from the dimly lit passenger room, two figures appeared, uncertain and small, against the hugeness of the river and the coming darkness. They were girls, twins, matching in every clear way, their features reflecting each other with an unsettling exactness. They wore simple gray clothes, thin and worn, completely not enough for the sharp cold that filled the atmosphere. Their heads were covered with dark, rough covers pulled low and tight, successfully hiding their faces, making them unknown. They held nothing, no bags, no packages, no small loved items, nothing to show they had come from anywhere exact or were headed for any certain location. They moved in exact, almost matched unity, stepping off the boat together, stopping together, waiting together like two halves of a single quiet being. One of the landing workers, a man named Tobias Hall, a tough, experienced person of the waterfront, later told to his wife Martha that the girls never once looked up. Their eyes stayed pointed at the ground, their looks turned away, as if the very action of looking might bring more bad luck. And when the wealthy man, with a dismissing wave of his hand, pointed for them to come, they did so without a second's pause, without a single question, like shadows obediently following a body. Tobias, a man who had seen countless arrivals and leavings, felt a tingle of worry. There was something deeply upsetting about their complete stillness, their total lack of fighting. Deveau brought them to a covered cart, its cloth top marked and aged, which stood waiting at the finish of the landing. The person driving, a man named Cato, a calm and quiet person who had worked the Deveau animal buildings for years, stepped down from the driver's place, his face marked with years of sunlight and work, showed no feeling as he opened the back cover of the cart. The wealthy man pointed again, a quiet command, and the twins, without a word, stepped inside, disappearing into the dark inside. Cato, his actions practiced and quick, closed the cloth cover, locking it firmly. With a squeak of wheels and a soft sound of animal feet on the muddy path, the cart rolled away, taken by the collecting darkness and the spinning river fog. No one asked questions. No one ever did, not when it involved the wealthy man. To question was to bring trouble, and trouble in St. Helena Parish often arrived with a quick, harsh ending. But Tobias Halt, who had seen many things in his 43 years, the rise and drop of river fortunes, the quiet hopelessness of the newly free, the casual meanness of the strong, said later that he felt something deep that dark time, a coldness that had nothing to do with the sharp weather, a feeling that something deeply wrong, something strongly unnatural, had just arrived in St. Helena Parish, and that it would not leave quietly. It was a feeling, a shake down his back that stayed long after the cart's rumbling disappeared into the darkness. The cart took the river path, a thin, curving track that went with the snake-like path of the Mississippi, back to the Jew property. The trip, nearly an hour long, was hard. The path was strongly marked and rough, a proof to years of forgetting and thick rains, and the cart's wheels cried and squeaked with every bump and turn, a sad cry against the quietness of the darkness. Inside the cart, covered in blackness, the twins sat in exact quietness. Cato, who moved with his back to them, his awareness turned to the path and the animals, later promised that he never heard them talk. Not once, not a breath, not a sad sound, not even the small movement of breathing. It was as if they had stopped to be, becoming just load, quiet and still. When the cart finally rolled through the tall metal gates of the Diru property, it was nearly 8:00. The house, a light point in the surrounding blackness, was lit from inside, every window shining with the warm, welcoming lamp brightness that hid the coldness within its walls. Henry and Julien, their shapes outlined against the bright inside, were waiting on the front covered area, using tobacco sticks, their faces lit by the moving embers, their eyes pointed on the long dark path. When they saw the cart come out from the darkness, they stood up straight, threw their tobacco sticks into the wet dirt, and came down the wide stone steps, their footsteps making noise faintly. Lucy and DeVoe stepped down from the cart, a winning smile showing on his lips, a rare show of real satisfaction. He looked at his sons, his look sweeping over them with owning pride. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice warm and deep, filled with a scary joy. "Your Christmas presents have arrived." Henry's face wrinkled almost invisibly, a spark of something like worry crossing his usually blank face. Julien, though, smiled, a wide, hunting smile that showed too much. Cato, ever quick, opened the back of the cart, and the twins, moving with their typical, unsettling matching, stepped out. For the first time, covered in the bright, unforgiving brightness pouring from the house, the Diru's sons could see them clearly. They were clearly young, 14, perhaps 15 years old, their bodies still thin, not yet completely shaped. Their skin was a warm, light brown, their hair dark and tied firmly against their heads, carefully neat. Their faces, now completely visible, were truly matching. High, delicate face bones, full, not smiling lips, and dark, bottomless eyes that showed the lamp brightness like polished black glass, showing nothing of the ideas or feelings that lay underneath. They had a striking, almost otherworldly prettiness, the kind that made men uncomfortable, exactly because they were still children, and prettiness in children, especially those in such a weak state, was a risky, often sad thing. Julien, ever the more quick-acting and openly mean, stepped toward, circling them slowly, his look staying, checking them with the separate careful study one might apply to a prize animal or a newly gotten hunting animal. Henry stayed where he was, his look unreadable, a cover of cold not caring. "Where did you locate them, father?" Julien asked, his voice filled with an owning interest. "New Orleans," Lucien answered, his manner smug. "A secret selling, very secret. They have no documents, no family, no background. As far as the society is concerned, they do not be. They are spirits waiting to be given shape by our desire." Henry's wrinkled face got deeper, a small fold between his face lines. "Father, the rules," he started, a bit of care in his voice. Even angry with all his meanness, grasped the moving grounds of the after-battle legal world. The rules Lucian stopped, his voice cutting, dismissing. "I say it is, Henry, and I say these girls are belonging, my belonging and now by extension yours, a present, a lesson, a tool." He pointed to the twins, a sweeping owning action. "They will work for you. They will follow you. They will do whatever you ask without question, without fighting. Think of them as an education in strength, gentlemen, because strength is not just what you receive. It is what you grab. It is what you claim. It is what you order." Julian made a sound, a sharp, ugly noise that bothered on the ears, empty of real happiness. Henry, as was his custom, said nothing, his quietness more scary than his brother's sound. The twins stood exactly still, their eyes still pointed on the ground, their hands folded neatly in front of them, a picture of passive following. They did not react to Lucian's statements, did not pull back, did not even seem to take air. They simply waited, two quiet statues in the harsh lamp brightness. Lucien DeVoe hit his hands once, a sharp, strong crack that made noise in the cold, dark atmosphere. "Take them inside," he ordered Cato, his voice now quick and businesslike. "Put them in the east part, the small space at the finish of the hallway. Secure the entrance and make sure they are given food sparingly." Cato agreed, his face still blank, and pointed for the twins to come. They did, moving with that same scary unity, their footsteps quiet on the wooden steps of the covered area, then disappearing into the making noise quietness of the house. As they disappeared into the hollow inside, Lucien turned back to his sons, a winning shine in his eyes. "Happy Christmas, gentlemen," he said, his voice a low, soft sound of satisfaction. "Use them carefully, and remember, they are a proof to our continuing desire." And then he went inside, leaving Henry and Julian standing in the sharp cold, looking at the entrance through which the twins had disappeared, the meanings of their father's present slowly settling upon them. That dark time, no one in the living areas rested well. The workers, gathered in their unheated homes, talked to each other in the blackness, passing along what small they understood, what small they had watched, that the wealthy man had brought something back from New Orleans, something secured away in the east part, something that was a present for his sons. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken worries, with the scary understanding that the old methods, though officially stopped, were far from gone. And in the main house, in the small cold space at the very finish of the east part, the twins sat on the empty ground in the solid blackness, keeping each other's hands, their bodies pushed together for warmth and comfort, and waited for Christmas morning, for whatever new terror it might bring. Their quietness was not giving in, but a strong, watching stillness, a quiet judging of their new jail. Christmas Day 1,873 started not with the holiday happiness of songs and bright brightnesses, but with a cold, heavy grayness. The sky was the color of old metal, thick and solid, pushing down on the delta. A light, continuing rain started to drop just after sunrise, a soft rhythmic tapping against the high thin windows of the Dio house like the firm drumming of fingernails on glass, a sad accompaniment to the day. Inside the DeVoe family collected in the main front room, a huge, dimly lit space, controlled by a massive fireplace that gave small warmth. Lucien DeVoe sat at the top of the long polished dark wood table, dressed in a dark, perfectly made suit, his gray hair brushed back with careful exactness, his look calm, almost blessed, as if he had just done a great action of kindness. Hari and Julian sat on either side of him, both unusually quiet, their usual loudness reduced by their father's tall presence and the unspoken importance of the earlier dark time's arrival. The table was arranged with the best brought-in dishes, delicate pottery decorated with complex patterns and shining glass cups that grabbed the tiny brightness. The breakfast, a rich spread of cooked meat, soft biscuits, homemade sweet spreads, and hot coffee, was given by two women from the living areas, their faces blank, their actions quick and practiced, their eyes carefully kept looking down, staying away from any straight contact. No one spoke about the twins. Their being, though feelable, was a quiet, uncomfortable reality, an elephant in the rich room. After breakfast, Lucien stood from the table, a small action of his hand ordering his sons to come. They walked through the hollow house in quietness, their footsteps making noise on the polished wood grounds, the sound made bigger in the stillness until they reached the east part, a less often used part of the house, colder and more lightly furnished. Lucien took out a small fancy key from his middle coat pocket, its yellow metal shining dully, and with a soft click, opened the thick wooden entrance at the very finish of the hallway. The space was small, barely bigger than a closet, and lightly furnished. A thin, uncomfortable-looking sleeping place with a thin covering, a single, wobbly wooden chair, and a washstand with a broken pottery bowl. The atmosphere was old, touched with the smell of dust and holding. The twins were sitting on the empty ground where they had been left the dark before, their bodies pushed together, still keeping hands, still completely quiet. They looked up when the entrance opened, their dark eyes meeting Lucien's look for a quick second, but their looks did not shift, staying as unreadable as polished stone. Lucien stepped aside, a show-off movement, and pointed for his sons to come into the small, tight space. "They are yours now," he said simply, his voice empty of feeling as if talking about a new piece of farm tool. "Do with them as you want. They are yours to order," and then he left, closing the entrance behind him with a soft, final sound, leaving his sons alone with their presence. What happened in that small, cold space over the next 3 months is not completely known, not in its complete, harsh detail. The twins, Cora and Clara, never talked of it in later years, their quietness a proof to the unspeakable. And the Dio's sons, Hari and Julia, never gave any reason, their memories handily choosing. But there are pieces, talks, bits of proof collected later from the workers in the living areas, people who saw things, heard things, saw things in the edge of their own hard existences. These pieces put together create a scary, suggested picture. A woman named Deline, who worked in the main house as a food maker, her hands constantly marked with white powder and oil, said that the twins were brought down to the cooking room every morning for a single tiny meal, a piece of old bread, a cup of water, sometimes, if they were fortunate, a piece of damaged fruit. They ate quickly, their actions exact and money saving in quietness, their eyes never meeting hers. As soon as they completed, they were taken back upstairs, there being a quick, unsettling darkness. Deline promised they never looked at anyone, never asked for anything, never made a noise. Their quietness was complete worrying. A man named Ezra, who cared for the animal buildings, his hands twisted from years of handling animals and thick tools, said that he saw Julian Deer bringing the twins out to the old cart house one afternoon in late January. The atmosphere was sharp, the ground still hard with ice. He remembered Julian's making sound, a harsh, wrong sound that moved on the wind, and the twins' complete lack of response. Ezra said he heard noises coming from the cart house, sharp breaking noises like wood breaking or something being hit. But he did not look into, no one looked into. To look into was to bring the wealthy man's anger, and that was a cost no one was ready to pay. He simply turned his back, acting like not hearing, not seeing. A young girl named Bess, barely 12 years old, who worked in the washing area, her small hands constantly rough from strong soap and cold water, said that she saw the twins once through a window. It was a rare second of stillness in her day. She said they were standing in their small space facing each other, their hands held together and their lips were moving, a quiet rhythmic action. She said it looked like they were asking, a hopeless, unheard asking, but she could not figure out the statements. Their faces, even from a distance, seemed marked with an old sadness, and a man named Samuel, who moved the Diru cart, a strong, reliable man who had worked the family for years, said that in early March he was told to take Henry and the twins into Greensburg. The spring atmosphere was starting to soften, holding the smell of wet dirt, and starting to bloom sweet-smelling flowers. He remembered Hungry sitting in the cart with them, his manner stiff, his look pointed straight forward, while the twins sat exactly still, their hands folded in their laps, their eyes looking down as if cut from wood. Samuel said that when they reached the settlement, Henry took them into the courthouse, the very same courthouse where ground papers and agreements were stored, where the destiny of so many was chosen on documents, and they were inside for nearly an hour. When they came out, Henry was smiling, a thin, satisfied bend of his lips, and the twins, as always, were not. Their faces stayed empty, unreadable. Samuel, a man of quiet watching, said he asked Henry what they had done in the courthouse, a rare second of interest beating his usual care. Henry, with a dismissing wave of his hand, told him to watch his own business, his manner sharp and cautioning. But Samuel saw something. When the twins stepped back into the cart, one of them, he could not tell which, for their looking alike was strange, was keeping a bit of document. It was folded small, put carefully into the cloth part of her simple gray clothes, almost invisible, but he saw it. Just for a quick second, a flash of white against the dull cloth. He never saw it again. The document, like so many other things in their existences, disappeared into the darknesses. By mid-March, the workers in the living areas were talking about the twins, not because of what they had seen, for they had seen small, but because of what they had not seen. The twins had been at the Diru property for 3 long quiet months, and in all that time no one had heard them talk, not a single statement, not a scream of hurt, not a sad sound of hopelessness, not even the softest noise of human speaking. Their quietness was a deep, unsettling puzzle. Some said they were unable to talk, created without the gift of speaking. Some said they were destroyed, their minds broken beyond fixing. Some, the more believing among them, talked that they were something else completely, something unnatural, something reached by the spirits of the waterway. And then, on the dark time of March 19th, 1874, as the first lightning bugs started to move in the wet atmosphere, everything shifted. The long quiet watching was about to break. The twins, Cora and Clara, had not been doing nothing in their holding. Their quietness was not a sign of giving in, but a protection, a carefully built front behind which their minds, sharp and strong, worked with a quiet, hopeless force. Their mother, back in Virginia before the burning, had been a clothes maker, but she had also had a strong love for education. She had shown her daughters to understand and create words, abilities thought risky for their position. but abilities that would finally become their saving. She had shown them to figure out the complex loops and fancy marks of the written statement, to open the mysteries kept within pages. In the dear house, a location where books were more often pretty than studied, they had located a hidden treasure. In the dusty, forgotten parts of the east part, in a small unused book room that smelled of rot and forgetting, they found old books, amounts of rules, forgotten histories, even a few torn novels. No one thought to secure them away, for who among the help would dare reach such things? And who among the dear family would even see, late at dark time, long after the house had dropped quiet, after the last lamp had been put out, Cora and Clara would move from their space. They moved like spirits, their empty feet quiet on the cold ground board. By the faint moving brightness of a taken candle end, or sometimes by the pale shine of the moon coming through a dirty window, they would study. They ate the statements, taking them in, grasping them. They discovered about the rules, about agreements, about belonging and controlling, and most importantly about the messy, often fighting legal world of rebuilding. They discovered that even in a pattern created to push down, there were ways out, breaks in the front if one understood where to look. They discovered about the courthouse in Greensburg, about the record books, the storings, the official marks that changed just statements into undeniable reality. They grasped that document properly done kept a strength even bigger than the wealthy man's riches or his son's meanness. When Henry had taken them into settlement in early March, supposedly to store the paper that officially noted them as belonging of the Dew family, a terrible illegal action, yet one that went unchained in St. Helena Parish in 1874, Cora had grabbed her chance, while Henry, pulled away and self-important, talked with the paper keeper. Cora, with a beyond natural calm, had moved away. She had located the paper's space, a dusty, dimly lit room filled with high shelves of record books. Her eyes, trained by countless hours of mystery studying, quickly found the exact record book where the paper was to be stored, and with a heart pounding like a caught bird, she had taken an empty page, a clean sheet of official document, its edges sharp, its top waiting for statements. It was that page, folded small and put into the cloth part of her clothes, a tiny, delicate seed of hope that the twins now held. It was their weapon, their protection, their only opportunity. They had survived the past 3 months not out of giving in, but out of a hopeless, planned patience, waiting for the exact second to hit. Their quietness was not brokenness, but a deep, scary power. March 19th, 1874 was a Thursday, a day that started like any other, but would finish in a huge change. The weather had turned strongly warm, the first real lazy warmth of springtime, a welcome break from the sharp cold of winter months. The atmosphere, thick with wetness, smelled of wet dirt, of starting existence, of the sweet mind-affecting smell of sweet-smelling flower starting to open. The workers in the living areas, their bodies tired, but their minds lifted by the promise of easier days, completed their day's work in the land, their tools and digging tools making noise softly, and came back to their homes, grateful for the longer daylight hours. At the main house, the pattern of strength and advantage continued. Lucendio was in his office, a space thick with the smell of old leather and tobacco smoke, looking at his record books by the soft shine of a single oil lamp, his face wrinkled in thinking. HRI was in the front room, lying in a cloth armchair, carelessly turning through a week-old newspaper, his attention somewhere else. Julian, ever not resting, was in the animal buildings, the atmosphere thick with the smell of dried grass and animal flesh, drinking cheap alcohol from a container and carefully cleaning his favorite gun, its tube shining scarily. The twins, Cora and Clara, were in their small, cold space, as they had been every dark time for 3 months, there being a quiet, almost forgotten part of the east part. At about 9:00, as the last remaining parts of evening disappeared into a moonless, star-dusted dark time, Deline the food maker was walking back to her home in the living areas. Her day was finished, her feet hurting, her mind already thinking about the short break of rest. As she went by the main house, her look, usually looking for any sign of trouble or unusual happening, moved towards the east part, and then she stopped, her breath grabbing in her throat, a sudden cold knot forming in her stomach. The east part window, the window of the twins' space, was opened. This was deeply unusual. Delphine remembered clearly that the window had been nailed closed back in January after Julian, in a burst of anger, had said that the twins were looking out of it too much, their quiet looks unsettling him. Deline herself had seen the nails, long and thick, pushed deep into the wooden frame, locking it with an almost harsh ending. But now the window was clearly opened, a dark, square-shaped empty space against the dimly lit wall, and the thin, dirty cloth was moving gently in the soft, dark time wind, a quiet signal. Deline stood frozen in the blackness, her heart starting to pound a slow, thick rhythm against her ribs, watching, waiting, and then she saw action. A darkness impossibly quick and low went across the opened window, and then another, a reflection. The twins were stepping out. Deline's first natural reaction was to scream out, to lift the alert, to complete her unspoken duty to the wealthy man.